Representative William Lamberth, House Majority Leader, is with us to talk about HB 1663 that we've been discussing for the better part of the show today. Representative, thank you for being on with us. I appreciate your time. I know it's very valuable. Hello, sir.
Hey, Matt, how are you guys doing today? Thank you for covering this important topic. We deeply appreciate it.
Well, it's obvious that most in the General Assembly are in agreement with you that the state of Tennessee needs to make a stand and a statement regarding child rape and what we do to child rapists in the state of Tennessee. I'll just start here because I think I've fairly described the legislation and what you're trying to accomplish. Obviously, there is Supreme Court precedent that goes against the idea of presenting the death penalty as an appropriate punishment for someone that does not commit murder. Talk to me about that aspect of this and what you are hoping to accomplish with this legislation.
Yeah, Matt, thank you very much. And look, this is only reserved for the worst of the worst criminals out there. This is reserved for those monsters that have been convicted of raping a child. The state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And not only have they been convicted of that crime, but a jury looks at their criminal history. They look at the aggravating factors of whether or not there were multiple victims, whether or not there were particularly heinous aspects to that crime. And then the jury, under this legislation, would be given the option to decide whether or not that person, because of their horrendous actions, should forfeit their own life. It's their actions that have created this havoc and mayhem and heartbreak for their victims, and so it's their actions that a jury would be judging. Now, when the U.S. Supreme Court found that this would not be an option and that the states would not have the option to have this penalty applied to these, again, monsters, part of their reasoning is that not enough states had this law in the books, and thus somehow or another the country had moved on from this, and that the death penalty should not be applied because enough states didn't think it should. Well, the 10th Amendment would say that we have the choice here in Tennessee. We as Tennesseans get to decide what the criminal penalties are for the criminal offenses that are in our code. And that's all we're asking. And I've talked to the Attorney General about this. I've talked to several extremely competent and good attorneys. And I don't want to speak for the Attorney General, but I will say several of my friends that are attorneys, as I am, believe that this court, this current U.S. Supreme Court, is much more 10th Amendment friendly. It is much more states' rights friendly. And that's all we're asking them to do, is that if this passes law in Tennessee, is for them to take the shackles off and allow us as Tennesseans to decide how we would punish these heinous criminals.
So you're well aware that this, I mean, it seems to me to be part of the point that you want to trigger some action in the courts, and you are prepared for that action moving forward to attempt to get a new decision or a revisit to this situation on the part of the Supreme Court?
We are absolutely ready to fight this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. If we save even one child from being raped by some monster out there, because they know that if this passes and if it withstands any scrutiny in the courts, that they will die if they rape a child in the state of Tennessee. And again, those aggravating factors are found by the jury. If that saves children from having this happen to them, it is absolutely worth every step of the fight, every amount of money that would go into that fight, and hopefully would set new precedent that states are the ones and the citizens of each state get to determine how we punish criminals and how we pursue justice within our state.
Representative William Lamberth on with us for a few moments talking about HB 1663, which just passed the Criminal Justice Subcommittee yesterday. Cameron Smith is with us, William, and he's got a question for you.
So how do you deal with the proportionality argument? That's a legal argument that you're going to have to overcome at the Supreme Court that says, well, the death penalty is the most extreme form of punishment. These crimes are heinous and awful and terrible, but they do not result in the physical death of a child. So that's going to be one of the central questions that you have to overcome. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, Cameron, thank you for asking that question. The way you respond to that is that you spend time with survivors of these heinous crimes. You talk to many of the victims that I have spoken to over the last almost 20 years of practicing law, both as a former prosecutor and current, just private practitioner. There are some fates that are worse than death. These survivors, these strong, amazing people who have been able to move through their life after these horrendous acts have happened to them, many times when they were just young children, and many times by those that they love and who are supposed to be there to protect them, who have abused them. Talk to these survivors, talk to these individuals that have a strength that many of us cannot even understand. And you will understand that from a proportional standpoint, it absolutely is appropriate that these monsters that commit these type of crimes should be put to death. They should not be able to live amongst us and be a risk to additional people out there and additional children if they are ever released. It is absolutely a proportional punishment for a horrendous crime that, again, quite frankly, is worse than death.
The one individual in the subcommittee that took some exception with this and ultimately voted against moving it out of subcommittee was Representative Gloria Johnson. We listened to her commentary, her justification. I think it's I don't think it's a very good argument that she's making, but I just want to give you, unencumbered by my commentary, to respond to Gloria Johnson's argument that you're going to cause a chilling effect and prevent victims from coming forward as a result of the death penalty being on the table for child rapists. How do you respond to that, William?
Yes, obviously I disagree with that, but the chilling effect that we are seeking here is a chilling effect on these type of crimes ever occurring to begin with. And when you talk to those that are helping to guide children and adults that have been abused by some of these monsters through both the criminal justice system and then through therapy and treatment and through their lives even beyond, you will get an extremely mixed bag of responses on how both those treatment professionals and survivors of these heinous crimes on how they feel about a punishment of this nature. This is a decision for all Tennesseans to make through their elected representatives. This is a policy consideration on what we feel like as a state the punishment should be for that type of heinous crime. In the 7 years that I was an assistant district attorney, I never looked at a victim of crime and a survivor of crime and said, hey, what do you want to happen to that defendant? It was the state of Tennessee versus that individual. It's the state's job to prosecute that person. It's not a civil suit. It's not that survivor versus that defendant. They are a critical part of this process, and their opinions and guidance should always be a part of it. That it is the state of Tennessee who is responsible for pursuing justice, not vengeance, but justice, and for both preventing these type of crimes and punishing those who have committed them.
I don't know that I believe these examples exist in the state of Tennessee that Gloria Johnson was bringing up, but I even went so far as to grant her that even if you could find a one-off example of a witness to a crime or someone that needed to testify against a family member, for example, then that might be the one-off that you downshift to life in prison on, if that is what it takes to get a prosecution and get the witness on the stand. But the point is that I think you've well made is give the prosecution the opportunity to opt for the death penalty in the most egregious, heinous, disgusting cases that come before the courts.
Absolutely, 100%. And look, if somebody is against the death penalty, if they, for some reason, feel that some disgusting pedophile should not be put to death for their crimes, then that's fine. That's their vote. I'm not going to chastise anybody else for their vote. They represent their district, and they have to vote their district and their conscience. But for me, in representing the people of Sumner County and people throughout the state of Tennessee, I have had an overwhelming response from average everyday citizens that have emailed in, that have commented on social media, that have called and texted me, and many of which who are survivors of child sexual assaults and have said, thank you for carrying this bill. And they feel like that this is an appropriate punishment for those few that are the worst of the worst, the most heinous individuals out there that have committed these crimes. And again, this decision on whether or not the death penalty would be applied would only be decided by a jury after they have decided guilt or innocence. It is only after that time in a bifurcated process that then they would look at the aggravated factors to decide whether or not, this penalty would be provided. We are simply adding it as a potential option.
This conversation about 1663 has opened up a broader question, and I want to pose it to you in the minute or so that we have left, because I know you're very busy, Representative. How do we speed up death penalty cases and ultimately the appellate process within the death penalty? Because many believe in the state of Tennessee, as I'm receiving this today as we discuss it, that the process takes so long, it takes away that deterrence factor that you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. How can is there a way for the General Assembly to help speed up the judicial process in that regard?
So justice delayed is definitely justice denied. But I will say, when we are talking about the state killing one of our citizens, even someone who has committed a heinous crime, we do need to make sure that there is never an instance where we are putting someone to death who is innocent. We do need to make sure that we have checked every box, that we have crossed every T, dotted every I. It is critical that we make sure that full due process is exercised. Now, I will tell you, Matt, there are ways that we can speed up that process and still keep those protections in place. For instance, a few years ago, I carried successfully a bill that took the Criminal Court of Appeals out of the process. Every single case was going from trial to the Criminal Court of Appeals and to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Neither the state nor the defendant were ever just kind of taking the Criminal Court of Appeals decision and just going home. I mean, it was always going to the Tennessee Supreme Court. And the Criminal Court of Appeals process was taking a year, 18 months, 2 years for those cases and just stretching it out. So I carried a bill, and it's law now, that says these cases go straight from trial to the Tennessee Supreme Court for appeal. There is no intermediary step. If they did that on the federal level and all of these went from trial to the U.S. Supreme Court, it would cut years, if not decades, out of this process. These are the most important cases that are coming through the judiciary. There's no reason why it should have to hit every one of those intermediary courts and have to wait in each one. Take these cases straight up to the Tennessee Supreme Court, which is what we've done here. And I would hope that our federal counterparts would look at potentially just taking these cases straight to the U.S. Supreme Court and battling those issues out there. I mean, it would cut years at least out of this process, because that's exactly what it did here at the state level. Now, that's beyond my purview as a state representative, but I hope what we've already done here in Tennessee sets a good example for what they could do at the federal level if they chose to, and still keep every single protection in place that is in place right now.
William, thank you for your time. Thank you for the bill itself. You get a lot of support from our listening audience, and I want you to know that. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Cameron. Good to talk to you guys.